The Caribbean Sea, once a source of life and beauty, is now swallowing our history whole. On the small island of Carriacou, part of the nation of Grenada, the rising tides tell a story of loss and fear. The Tibeau cemetery, a sacred resting place for generations, is no more. The sea, relentless in its advance, has claimed it. Tombs, headstones, the very ground beneath our feet, all gone, swept away by the rising water. Imagine the grief of losing a loved one twice over. This is the reality for the people of Carriacou. The sea has taken not just land, but their past, their memories, their connection to those who came before. This is not just a story about Carriacou. It's a story repeating itself across the Caribbean. From the Bahamas to Barbados, the sea encroaches inch by inch, claiming homes, businesses, and sacred spaces. The ocean, once a source of sustenance and joy, is now a constant threat. The very existence of these island nations is in jeopardy. Climate change is not a future threat for us. It is our daily reality. The loss of the Tibeau cemetery is a stark reminder of what is at stake. It's a symbol of the cultural and emotional toll of climate change, a loss that cannot be measured in dollars and cents. But it is also a call to action. We cannot stand by as our history, our culture, our very existence is washed away. The fight for climate justice has reached a critical juncture. No longer content with empty promises and inadequate action, vulnerable nations are taking a stand. In an unprecedented move, Caribbean countries, led by Grenada, have turned to the International Court of Justice. This is not just a legal battle, it's a fight for survival. The message is clear. The world's biggest polluters must be held accountable for the devastation they have caused. For decades, wealthy nations have turned a blind eye to the plight of those on the front lines of the climate crisis. They have grown rich from industries that pollute our planet, while small island nations like mine bear the brunt of the consequences. This is not just about emissions. It's about justice, equity, and the right to exist. We are not asking for charity, we are demanding reparations. The time for talk is over. The time for action is now. The eyes of the world are on The Hague as the International Court of Justice hears arguments in this landmark case. Never before has the issue of climate change been brought before the world's highest court. This is a testament to the courage and determination of the Caribbean nations leading the charge. The legal arguments are complex, but the central question is simple. Do nations have a legal obligation to protect the climate system from human-caused harm? A favorable ruling from the International Court of Justice could have far-reaching implications, potentially reshaping international law and forcing nations to finally take meaningful action on climate change. This is a David and Goliath battle, with small island nations facing off against some of the world's most powerful countries. But the stakes are too high to back down. The future of our planet and the lives of millions hangs in the balance. The Caribbean is a tapestry of vibrant cultures, breathtaking landscapes, and resilient people. But our paradise is under threat. The stories we hear from across the region paint a grim picture of a future on the brink. In Dominica, once known as the nature island for its lush rainforests, communities are still reeling from the devastation of Hurricane Maria. The storm, a Category 5 monster fueled by warming ocean waters, ripped through the island in 2017, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. In Barbuda, the entire island was evacuated as Hurricane Irma, another Category 5 storm, tore through the Caribbean. Homes were reduced to rubble, livelihoods destroyed, and a way of life shattered. The island, once a haven of tranquility, is now a stark reminder of the destructive power of climate change. The words of Grenada's Prime Minister, Dickon Mitchell, echo in the aftermath of Hurricane Beryl. Armageddon-like destruction, he says, describing the scene that greeted him after the storm ravaged his island nation. Homes ripped apart, businesses flattened, infrastructure decimated, the force of the hurricane leaving an indelible mark on the landscape and the hearts of the Grenadian people. The Caribbean is no stranger to hurricanes, but the ferocity of these recent storms is unprecedented. Scientists warn that as the planet warms, we can expect more frequent and intense hurricanes, fueled by hotter ocean temperatures and increased moisture in the atmosphere. This is the new normal, a terrifying reality that we must confront head-on. Section 6. The broken promises of climate finance. The fight for climate justice is not just about holding polluters accountable. It's about ensuring that vulnerable nations have the resources they need to adapt to a changing climate and rebuild their lives after disasters. For years, wealthy countries have promised to provide financial assistance to developing nations on the front lines of the climate crisis. But these promises have rung hollow. The Green Climate Fund, established to channel billions of dollars from developed countries to developing nations, has been plagued by bureaucracy, delays, and a lack of political will. Small island developing states, despite being among the most vulnerable to climate change, have faced significant hurdles in accessing these funds. The process is often lengthy and complex, requiring technical expertise and resources that many small island developing states simply do not have. This is not just a funding gap, it's a justice gap. The failure to deliver on climate finance commitments is a betrayal of trust and a recipe for disaster. Without adequate funding, vulnerable nations will continue to be trapped in a cycle of devastation and debt, unable to adapt to a changing climate or rebuild their lives after disasters. Section 7. A lifeline for sinking nations. The concept of loss and damage is at the heart of the Caribbean's fight for climate justice. It acknowledges that some impacts of climate change are simply unavoidable, no matter how much we mitigate or adapt. For small island developing states, this means facing the very real possibility of losing their land, their cultures, their very existence. A key demand of vulnerable nations is the establishment of a dedicated funding mechanism for loss and damage. This would provide a lifeline for countries facing the irreversible consequences of climate change, allowing them to rebuild their shattered economies, relocate communities displaced by rising sea levels, and preserve their cultural heritage. The fight for loss and damage funding is not just about money, it's about recognizing the moral imperative to support those who are least responsible for the climate crisis, but are bearing the brunt of its impacts. It's about standing in solidarity with those on the front lines, offering them a chance to survive and thrive in a changing world. Section 8. When homes become hazards. In the Bahamas, the scars of Hurricane Dorian run deep. The 2019 storm, a Category 5 monster, stalled over the northern Bahamas for days, unleashing its fury on the islands of Abaco and Grand Bahama. The devastation was unimaginable. Homes were reduced to rubble, businesses flattened, and entire communities wiped off the map. But the storm also exposed a harsh reality: the increasing unaffordability of safety in the face of climate change. Insurance premiums have skyrocketed as the risks of climate-related disasters grow. Many in the Caribbean are priced out of protection, left vulnerable to the whims of a changing climate. The story of the Bahamas is a stark reminder that climate change is not just an environmental issue, it's a social justice issue, an economic issue, a human rights issue. It's about the right to live in a safe and healthy environment, a right that is increasingly out of reach for millions in the Caribbean and beyond. Section 9. A turning tide for climate action. The Caribbean's fight for climate justice is a beacon of hope in a world grappling with the complexities of a warming planet. The courage of these island nations, standing up to powerful polluters and demanding accountability, is an inspiration to us all. The case before the International Court of Justice, while just one piece of a much larger puzzle, has the potential to be a game changer. A favorable ruling could have ripple effects across the globe, strengthening international law and empowering other vulnerable nations to seek justice for the climate harms they have suffered. It could compel wealthy countries to finally fulfill their climate finance commitments, providing much-needed resources for adaptation and resilience. The fight for climate justice is far from over, but there is a growing sense of momentum, a feeling that the tide is turning. From the courtroom to the streets, people are rising up, demanding action, and refusing to accept a future of climate chaos. The Caribbean, once again, is at the forefront of this fight, showing the world that even the smallest of nations can make a difference,